Good morning. Welcome to our Budget Committee for Monday, December the 2nd, 2019. I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask if there's any declarations of interest. Seeing none, we will be moving to our 2020 proposed business plan and budget deliberations. And I'm not sure from staff who's going to take the lead with this at this point. Mr. Webster is? Very good.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As we enjoy this winter, all of us, we will provide some opening contextual comments. So it's often interesting for municipalities as they're in budget processes to monitor neighbors and adjacent municipalities. And I was fortunate last week to be with the N6 CAOs. And so we shared information at the table that where we were with our different budget processes, and I won't cite the specific municipalities, but I will cite some sort of general themes or context, if I may. It appears that the large majority of municipalities are in agreement that inflation is currently tracking just below 2%. So that's sort of a good benchmark to look at. Most municipalities, and by most, I would say the majority of this group, are dealing with a target from their councils, which is to bring their base programs and budgets in line with that number. So 2% or lower. And the large majority are also adding an additional percent on. Most are directing it towards asset management. So at this point in time, I believe 3 of the 4 are in a position very similar to us, where they're basically one of them even cited the number that I believe is going forward for approval tonight is the bargain of 2.99%. So they've brought it in at the 0.99. There's one municipality has deferred their deliberations to next year. They're having a few struggles with some of those targets, so they've decided to put it off till next year. And one municipality is actually going through some changes in leadership and other matters, and it's actually tracking right now about double the other one. So it's got some work to do. So it gives us some context. I will remind folks that we, from a relative basis, a 1% increase for us is still a lot less than a 1% increase for other municipalities. Just some general themes that I think have been very helpful for staff in the council budget deliberations to date. A lot of them deal with our multi-year funding programs. And in those ones, you're often using guesstimates or best estimates. And we have 3 of those right now that are being examined. Firstly is our emergency services one. We've been plugging away for many years at our full-time complement, and we've done a good job. We're too short on our full-time FTE complement, even though it's working quite well under our emergency services leadership. And we've really bolstered the ranks as far as our frontline public education and training, those other 2 lines of defense. The second one is our engineering and development fees area, which is under Mike Molinari, the general manager. We're looking at that one as we think we might have been a little robust in our calculation for what we were going to be getting from development fees. And when you look at the duties of folks in those positions, what we're finding is a lot of the duties are relating to existing conditions, ditches that get full, or other problems that happen in the community. And we feel that in certain parts of that area that we could be doing a better job of funding it from particularly possibly tax levy. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. And the third area is with respect to our new facilities. And we haven't spent a lot of time on that at this point, but what I can tell you is we've learned from best practices in other communities. And I think Markham was actually showed us a real ideal when they opened the Angus Glen Community Center. And pretty impressive community center with 2 rinks, libraries, and all other a pool and other assets like that. And when they opened, they had it fully funded for operations. And so we've been working towards that. I believe going into this budget, the number that was outlined to me is that we have for our operations center build, which would hopefully be open about this time next year, and for the new community center centered in Queensville. We've currently, up to this point, have about $700,000 of sustainable tax levy funding, which is very impressive. And I believe this budget would put another 110,000 towards that. And I think we are looking at a number between the two facilities somewhere in the magnitude of about $1 million. So we're well on our way on those three areas. So that's just some opening context. There's some more work to be done today for sure. And I'll pass it over to Mr. Velchich and his team to carry out today's budget deliberations.
Thanks, Tom. So I think, Madam Mayor, the CAO has set the stage very nicely in terms of where we're at and some of the bigger picture context for your consideration as you proceed today. We've had two very productive full days of budget deliberations so far. This is the third. And we have essentially a working agenda or a plan that Mr. Marshall will share with you to try and help guide your deliberations today. If it's okay with you, I'll turn it over to Warren, and he can start to take us through the plan for today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of committee. There are a few areas that we want to cover today, and looking for some guidance and some feedback, and to provide some additional information for you. So first, we'd like to just remind everyone where we're sitting at as of deliberations at the end of last week. Give a bit of an update on what's happened with assessment for 2019. There was some additional information that was requested during the deliberations, and we sent out a package last week, and we've got a hard copy of that package available today, and we wanted to just step you through that package of information. There were some, while we were considering the CIES budget, we were looking at the engineering program, and there were some concerns regarding the draw on the reserves, and we wanted to come back with some options on how we would like to address some of those concerns as well. While we were doing the CIS budget, one of the pressures in the budget was the proposal for a mosquito control enhancement. And we were asked to put that aside and bring that back as part of the new initiatives discussion. And we weren't able to do that. So we would like to take this opportunity to do that today. And finally, we're looking for some guidance regarding a target for tax levy. So when we started our deliberations last week, we had proposed a tax levy increase for base programs of 2.2% and the dedicated tax levy increase for facilities and for emergency services of 0.5% each, which brought the total increase to 3.2%. As we went through our deliberations, we discussed the community initiatives and landed on a number of $37,450 that was not included in the budget that would have to be included in order to provide those funds, which is about a 0.2% increase. So as we stand going into today's discussions, we're at a 3.4% increase to the tax levy, all in. So just a little note on assessment. So MPAC usually has typically taken in between 12 months to 3 years to add new assessment onto the tax roll for the municipality. And we budget for supplementary taxes, and we try to estimate the timing of those supplementary taxes. And we're usually somewhat conservative in that estimate, and usually we're fairly close. This year, MPAC actually caught up and did a really good job, and ended up being approximately $360,000 worth of assessment that came earlier than we had anticipated. So what we've done is we're parking that additional assessment aside for 2021's growth-related pressures. So we're able to deal with them. It's an issue of timing, so we want to make sure that we have those funds available when those pressures are in. So what you'll see in the budget is a change in the tax line items between supplemental taxes and the true tax assessment. And the end result is there's no impact to the bottom line. So some of those growth-related pressures would be such as the winter operations that was identified before that there's going to be pressures on winter operations due to the increased number of lane kilometers and the increased number of events. So that's a growth-related pressure that we'd be able to help provide for with this assessment in 2021. So I don't know if there's any questions with that.
Are there questions at this point? Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In past budgets, we had been, I guess to a certain extent, using our reserves to pay forward the assessment that we knew that was going to be coming from MPAC. So we were buying ourselves a bit of time. Have we caught up from? There was some. I'm not sure which reserve that we were using it for, but there was a plan because we knew we were expending before we were receiving the revenue. Have we matched that? Have we caught up to that? Is that all paid back?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we were using the working capital reserve to kind of fund that shortfall until we caught up, and we have caught up now, and now this is why we're actually ahead now and able to put some away and use them for future years.
Mr. Webster.
Actually, Mr. Marshall, if you don't mind, I could provide a little more context to that too. And this was another discussion that I didn't state. So one of the more intriguing elements, and a few of us have been in the business quite a while of budgets and municipal government, is municipalities have taken a look at multi-year operating budgets. And some have looked at. What I can tell you is behind the scenes, we do have a staff team, and the key driver of budgets is clearly staffing levels. That is the staffing levels, steps, benefits, and we have spent a lot of time on a multi-year staffing plan. And so we've taken a look a couple years out. And I think what Mr. Marshall is really indicating here is in the past, there have been some municipalities, and these are well-managed municipalities. I'd cite Mississauga, the McCallion era, that were able to deliver years and years of zero increase. And what frankly happened was when they got news such as today, they said, what a great opportunity. We can give a zero to our residents. And it's basically not a sustainable initiative to undertake. And we still feel delivering your base programs and in a multi-year way. And our challenge, as I said today, was our multi-year funding programs. We also have a multi-year revenue strategy that's happening behind the scenes with our finance team.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Crothers.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'm looking at the community initiatives where we're drawing from reserves. Why are we drawing from reserves for something like this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, those initiatives are one-time funding initiatives. So instead of putting them in the base and keeping them there for year after year, we've decided to fund them one time out of the reserve, and so it doesn't have an impact on the tax levy.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Not yet, but I'm sure they're coming.
Yes, I'm ready. So next, we'd like to go through the supplementary information that we've provided. Mrs. Dima will take you through the package that was handed out this morning and emailed last week. And if you have any questions, we can go through them as they come up.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Everybody has received the hard copy and an electronic copy of the second addendum package. It was sent out on Friday afternoon. Does anybody not have a copy? Because we do have some spares. Sorry. Okay. So the first section are amendments to your budget binder. So we've noted what the page number replacements are on the right-hand side. First section would be the mayor and council summaries. We've updated those based on the discussions last week and included the council endorsed initiatives. There's a net tax levy increase, $37,450, and a net increase from the draw for working capital for $13,800. So as Mr. Marshall indicated, those are for the one-time fundings, not included in the base. The second item is just an updated summary. It's just a wording change on that summary page. It updates page 40, no impact there. The third items, capital program summary. We've updated with the council endorsed projects from last week, removed the ones that were not. Any changes from both addendum packages are highlighted in red. And that replaces pages 71 to 73 for the summary. And then you have a new updated capital project sheet for the OP plan, project 20-018. That updates page 94 in your binder. The next item is a new staff request. Just the summary page has been updated. There was a typo on that page. 40,000 was missing. It was included on the detail sheet. So we've just updated the summary sheet and provided a new copy. That's page 153. And the last item to amend your budget binder, new initiative NI-014, that was handed out last week in the addendum package. It's just an update on wording on that project sheet, no change to the funding there. The next items in the package were supplemental information. I'll just go through them quickly so you know what's there, and then if there's any questions, we can give further information on those. So the first item is training, professional development, and memberships. There was some information requested regarding what has been done in the past, what's the breakdown of what's in that line. So we've broken it down into professional development, memberships, and corporate training. And we've given you the budget information back to 2018 and summarized it all together for all departments on one page. The next item is some supplemental information on the farmers market. Some information regarding what the indirect costs are that are absorbed within the CPRC budget is within that page. The next one is just some additional information and uptake on some of our subsidy programs within CPRC. And the last one is just a memo from the library with the statistics that were provided in her presentation, but not included in the written package. So if there's any questions, then we can answer those at this time.
I'm not seeing any at this time. Thank you.
So next, we would like to discuss the engineering program. So in our review of the development and fee-supported budget, there was a proposed draw on the development engineering reserve of $886,000. And there was some questions regarding whether this is sustainable and if there's anything that we can do to review that draw. So we've gone back and we have in our work plan a review of fees for both the development engineering and the fill bylaw reserves. And we're planning to come back in Q1 of 2020 to look at those fees in an effort to make sure that the funding is sustainable. But there's also some things that we can do right now that we would like to table for your consideration that would help lower the draw on the reserve. So the first thing that we've tabled is eliminating the budget for a vacant position. So there's a municipal inspector position that has been vacant for about a year right now. And we have proposed that we could remove that budget and reinstate it when volumes are dictate that we require that position. We've further to Mr. Webster's comment earlier about work that's being done out of fee-supported areas that really relate to operating and ongoing operations. There is an opportunity to reinstate some salaries that are fully charged to this reserve and put that back into the tax levy. As well as we do our review of our fees, there is a potential of additional revenues that we could generate. Well, that could be also included. And there was a discussion earlier about the corporate contingency amount that's in the CAO's budget, and we could propose to use that to help lower the reserve draw as well. So overall, plus and minus is because we're still working out some of the details, and it also depends on where we're looking at in terms of a target. So, but we can, from these initiatives alone, we could lower the draw by about $300,000. So, looking for some feedback or some guidance on these options.
Feedback or guidance? Questions, comments? Councillor Crothers.
I think this is great listening to us and coming back with something that we've asked for. I think it gets us closer to where we're more comfortable. So thank you for that. I agree with all of these.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you. The allocate additional tax assessment to support the operating salary, that 75,000, is that the 360 that we said we were going to hang on to and not spend, or where is that coming from?
So through you, Madam Mayor, that would be one of the things that we would go back and look at. It wouldn't be that additional 360, but it would be something that we would have to find elsewhere within the budget.
Thank you. I think this is, obviously this was an issue that we wanted to address. It's an $886,000 hole. So so this is certainly a step in the right direction. It seems a little bit convenient that we can move some things around and find some additional revenue from fees that we don't necessarily can't guarantee that that's coming in. And that's really just a question of us looking at our fee and reviewing them and saying, well, they need to be higher because we have expenses that we need to pay. I think we also need to do sharpen our pencils a little further and see what we can do about reducing the expenses overall rather than simply finding a way to pay for the expenses that we're incurring. Thank you.
Councillor Crone.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. To staff, I appreciate this. This is a very good start. I've been here a year, and I'm very protective of our reserves, so I want to make sure that we try to keep them as intact as possible. So I appreciate the effort here. I agree with Councillor Roy DeClemente. Anytime we can sharpen our pencils and scale it back even more, I think that would be beneficial to protect our reserves as much as possible, so that when that rainy day comes, we've got the money there when we need it. Okay. Thank you, but thank you for listening and getting back to us.
Any other comments, questions? Mr. Webster.
Again, just an observation, Madam Mayor. One of the things we've heard in this budget process, and for us, it's a matter at the staff level of trying to garner your revenues from the sources where they're being created. And one of the things we heard in the presentation regarding Phil is we had the public meeting last week on the overhaul. And there seems to be a public perception that we're in the money-making business on that. Actually, one of the things, we are one of the few municipalities that has a fee for monitoring and, for lack of a better word, policing. And we're finding that the fee that we currently have is understated. We think that as we move into a higher activity level there could be the need to have additional resources dedicated to making sure that these sites that have a significant community impact are being properly looked after. So we're not in the profits business. We're in that reserve. I think you'll see potentially more cost being allocated to it. I know in our bylaw enforcement area, we spend a lot of time policing that. And one of the things that we have talked about at the staff level, again, as a part of this discussion, is the 40 plus illegal fill operations. And when you look at that, we currently collect zero revenue. And so you spend a lot of corporate resources at the staff level, at the senior level, and at the council level, hearing about these, monitoring these, trying to shut these operations down. And so we've asked our solicitor to work with our staff team to, this one is, again, potentially with the Lake Simcoe Authority, to see if we can come up with a more robust fine structure so that A, we can capture costs dedicated to that initiative, and B, so that we can stop these illegal fill operations that are potentially impacting groundwater and other things such as that. So those are part of the key reasons that we're looking at that midterm action being the update to both the development engineering and the fill bylaw piece.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? I certainly look forward to tackling those illegal fill operations. We know they're there. They know that we struggle in trying to enforce it. And so we are one of the chosen areas, and we have residents who feel that because they have wetlands on their property, it is swamp and of no value, and so put the fill in. And we all know that that water that is within those areas ultimately ends up in Lake Simcoe. So I'm wondering, even, we're talking, I know, with the federal folks about some kind of Lake Simcoe protection plan that was in place. They plan an action that was in place a few years ago to have it reinstated, and it sounds like perhaps there may be something that we can work with that as well, because I really am disgusted by the number of people that think that we are a dumping ground for fill, whether it's contaminated or good fill. We don't know because they just come in and dump and they're gone. So it's one we need to really tackle going forward. And if we can, in fact, end up with the fees that we justly deserve, then that's all the better. Any questions, comments? I guess I have one about reserves, and it's more of a philosophical, but we get into a lot of things at budget time that we park and deal with at a later time. And I'm wondering if we know, with all of our reserves, what is the right number of dollars that need to be in a reserve? Do we continue to have it grow and grow, or is there that need that we know when it gets to a certain point, we've landed on it, these are the uses that this is going to have moving forward? What is the right number? And I'm not sure that I don't need the answer today, but it as we start to talk about reserves, we have many reserves. They're very healthy, but what's the right number in the reserves? And we're saving for the future. And at what point does that future come to us? Is it a light switch that happens overnight? Is it something that gradually comes in and we start to use it? And perhaps it's one of those workshops that we can do into the new year. But the understanding of reserves and long-term, how we deal with them, I think, are extremely important for council to understand, but also to go through that exercise. So when we're asked by the public, financially, how are we? And it looks like things are very healthy. Then if we can articulate to them exactly at what level those reserves need to be, and exactly what they're going to be used for. And if it's fluid for use, then we need to know that as well. And I'm sure we understand it, but to be able to articulate it to the public becomes a whole different issue. You're the experts in the finances, not us. So I just leave that thought with staff and council. Councillor Martin.
Just going back to what you were saying about the illegal fill operation and everything, is there any way that we can monitor our rivers as well? Because people are throwing junk in there and chairs and couches and everything else. And I mean, I don't know how we can save that, but eventually, whatever is in those, um, stop it. Whatever is in those, I mean, eventually it starts to go through the river anyways and up into Lake Simcoe. So it's maybe something else that we need to take a look at as well as we move forward.
I'm not sure if your question is to staff. My comment would be that the province needs to step up. They need to help us when it comes to these illegal areas, and it's not even fill. In some cases, it's a matter of many vehicles, derelict vehicles. They have fluids within them that drain eventually into the ground and move into the water course. So I really think that it's the province that needs to first be aware of it, and we need to understand exactly what kind of help we need in doing that, and be pretty bullish about getting to the province right people and letting them know we need that help. Staff, do you have comments? Okay. Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. To that point, is it worth us writing a letter to our MPP on that specific issue? Because it's one thing for us to be saying here, province needs to step up, but I think a direct ask on behalf of council would go a long ways towards that. I have more to add, but go ahead.
We can always write a letter to our local MPP. We can meet with our MPP. I don't think it ever hurts. I think the more information that they have as time goes on keeps us front of mind when there are projects that we may fit in with. So certainly if we could park that until after our budget is over, I think other people have a few of those kinds of ideas as well. Budgets have us thinking in a very different way than our daily activities that are here. So if we can just park that one for following budget, and I think we can have a good discussion about that for sure.
So perhaps a resolution from council following budget about that. I think a council resolution goes a long ways. I have a couple other comments, if I may. The draws from reserves for the community initiatives, although they're one-time funding, I'm not sure I'm in agreement that we should be drawing from reserves, because next year there'll be some other one-time funding. The year after there'll be some other thing. These community initiatives, they do come and go, but I'm not sure that's the intention of our reserves. So to the mayor's point previously about reserves, I think we need to have a discussion about our reserves, what they're for, when they get spent. I don't agree with using reserves to pay for these community initiatives. I think community initiatives need to be looked at each year on their own merits. And this year we have a huge percentage increase in our community initiatives. And I don't think it's fair to draw from reserves. That being said, well, I'm all about cut on a lot of these things. When I look at the supplemental material from the library and look at their huge increase, a 53% increase in new library cards issued this year, we need to think at what point do we substantially increase the library budget? You know, when we have development coming in, we increase our planning department so they can plan for it. A lot of, for Parks and Rec, we have parks being funded by developers. A lot of their programs are cost neutral, so there's not an impact there, but the library bears the brunt of the costs of all these new residents coming in, and I think they've been very modest in their asks, but at some point, I think there needs to be a big bump in the operating costs of the library, and rather than just a one-off year after year, we need one more person. We need to rethink how we're funding the library given the large amount of growth. And my one last comment is on the Holland Landing employment area strategy that's been taken out of the budget. Being at Vince's the other morning for their grand opening and seeing how much work went in from our staff to making sure that they had everything they needed so they could open on time. It really says to me that if we want to attract businesses here, we need a strategy. And I think the employment area in Holland Landing is a great area that we should be encouraging employment in. And if we need a strategy there and it costs money to do that, I think that that's something that we should be doing. I think it's short-sighted to be taking that out of the budget. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Comments, questions? Comment? No?
Madam Mayor, there's been a lot of discussion about reserves. We're happy to come back and provide some additional perspective from staff on reserves. We have been very consistent in our application of reserves in the past, and they've been for what we perceive to be one-time or capital type expenditures. So what's proposed to you this year is very much consistent with the council position, but we can bring that back, and there can be updated discussion on that, and more information, and perhaps some modifications to strategy and direction moving forward. We're certainly open to that, and I think it would be very timely. I would say, just for budget committee's sake and for those watching, that we've been very conscious of, and the CAO touched on it earlier, taking a multi-year view of how we look at both expenditure forecasts and raising revenue, to try and make sure we do things in a relatively even and balanced way over time, rather than massive spikes and valleys. And with respect to reserves, we've been gradually building those. They are in a healthy position, but I think as you start to have more extensive information provided to you around capital asset management plans and those sorts of things, you're going to see that there will be certainly more work to do moving forward. But I think we're in good shape and we're on the right track. So we look forward to having more discussions with committee in the new year, maybe in a workshop format. I think it's a great idea.
When you say we're in good shape, I think we're in great shape. I think that we have planned for years and years for this growth, and our reserves certainly show it when you take a look at other municipalities in the same boat that we're in, that they have some growth taking place. They've been waiting for a long time. They don't have the reserves that we have, and I think we're in great shape with the reserves. It's now a matter of understanding how they're going to operate for us longer term. So thank you. Councillor Roy DiClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With respect to the library, I think absolutely we do need to be mindful of the impact on their operating going forward. I think, well, I guess my question through you, Madam Mayor, to staff is, we've been carving out operating funds for the Health and Active Living Plaza. I've been told in the past that that some of that money was also being earmarked for operating the new library branch. I think that may be the strategic point at which we're going to have to really invest in library operations, given there's a new branch opening that will need to be resourced accordingly. So I think from that perspective, I'd like an understanding of that operating plan. You know, the CAO has suggested we need about $1 million. We've carved out about 810. How is that apportioned between library and other program areas within that facility? Overall, yes, our resources in our reserves are quite healthy, particularly when we look at our development charges reserves. But going forward, I think it's a valuable conversation to have when we're looking at our tax rate funded reserves. They're they're not quite as healthy, and they are subject to quite a few drawdowns. If we look at, for example, our vehicle equipment and replacement, we've got contributions of 940, but drawdowns of 1.3 million. Again, over in general capital, we're contributing 310, but drawing 968. I think we need to be a little bit more mindful, and I know staff have a plan. As we said, there's a multi-year plan, but particularly when we start talking about vehicles, if we're going to buy $1 million fire truck, at what have we saved enough to do so, or are we buying it prematurely, or are we not putting enough into our vehicle replacement reserve in order to be able to fund other requirements like a new dump truck or a plow or something like that. So for me, those areas, I think the program areas where we're managing our assets and we're paying for capital, I want to be comfortable that we are putting what we need in and that we're drawing down accordingly. I did have a question as far as the working capital, the tax stabilization reserve. We're proposing 503,000 according to the estimated reserve balances, but when I pull our capital list on page 72 of the binder, I'm only tallying 453,000. So I'm just wondering what else we're pulling from the working capital tax rate reserve.
Through you, Madam. We might need a couple minutes to drill down to get where that draw comes from, but we're thinking it might be from the operating side, so you wouldn't see that in the capital listing. But we just want to make sure that that's the case.
So we would be pulling from our reserves in order to spend in operating.
Yeah, some
for
one-time.
a one-time
Yeah.
expense.
So, but let us confirm that and get back to you.
I guess for me, the overall message here is, while our DC reserves are healthy, I am hypersensitive of drawing down when we've only got, when I look at it, there's several $100,000 difference. If you look at the bottom line, we're contributing net less than we're actually spending. And so that deficit will continue to grow if we continue to do that.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. The difference between what is being drawn in the capital for the 500, well, the total draw, the 503, there's 450 from capital. 50,000 is for the job evaluation review that we're funding, and that's out of the operating program. That brings you to the 503.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So what we wanted to do now was through the CIS deliberations, we wanted to bring up the item that was pulled out, which was the enhancement to the mosquito control program. So I think council, our committee directed us to bring that back for, I guess, further discussion. So this is the opportunity.
Mr. Velcher.
Madam Mayor, just a little bit of further context to the to Warren's comments there. That item was originally referred to the budget process through CWC committee meetings, and I think from staff perspective, I think committee advised us that they would have expected to have seen that as a new initiative, and then budget committee deliberated whether they wanted additional service to the program or not, or a higher level of service to the mosquito program or not. But we've actually got that. Maybe I'll just ask Warren just to confirm that is currently built in to the to the 3.4 that you talked about as current status.
That's correct.
So ideally, what should have happened, and what would the impact be if that had not been built in and was kept out separately as a new initiative?
It's about 0.3.
About a 0.3. So just to put it into perspective, had we brought it forward, probably likely the way we should have, we'd be sitting right now at 3.1, and then you would be deliberating whether that was a service level increase that you wish to support or not. So we just wanted to make sure that you now had an opportunity to have that conversation. But I wanted you to understand what the impact would be of those of that conversation.
Thank you. Comments, questions? I think that our mosquito program has been very positive for many years, long before I got here. It was here, and people certainly appreciate it. There's no question. We do have a lot of wetlands in the area, and the quality of life is certainly better for people who particularly back on to those wetlands, that they're able to enjoy the outdoors much differently in the summertime. This is an enhancement to the program, and I don't want anybody to be confused in that it's either our mosquito program or it's not. This is an enhancement that we're talking about today, about increasing the level of service that we have. And we probably should have had this in with other projects that were an enhancement. But we don't. So I think this is an opportunity to talk about it and to see if in fact a 0.2, is it 2? 0.3, if it's a 0.3, that we all are well aware of that as we make that decision, knowing that the existing program is within our budget and expected that probably 20 years later, we're still going to provide the same level of service that has been done over the years. So I just want to make that clear. Discussion about the enhanced program. Councillor Roy DiClemente.
Thank you. What strikes me about recalling the presentation we had from our expert was that our mosquito program was already second only to the city of Winnipeg. And so for me, it's already a robust program. And if it's 0.3 on our operating, then for me, I'm willing to take a break and not enhance the service. I think for me, it's the service level increase that isn't necessarily warranted, given that we've already got such a robust program. The other consideration might be to simply have it as a one-time pilot project and not necessarily build it into our operating, but simply try it for a year and see how things go. That might be another way if folks are passionate about maintaining it. But from where I sit, it's not a necessity at this point.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Crothers.
I can tell you that down in the Landing, this is considered a quality of life issue, as the mayor has mentioned. How robust our current program is, people still can't go outside in certain areas that back onto wetland, especially down around the lagoons. The mosquitoes are terrible. They might be different in other areas of the town, but I know, speaking on behalf of the residents in Ward 1, this is something I hear repeatedly as an issue that they want some action on. The comment about Winnipeg, I think we're talking apples and oranges. I think there's other towns that are doing different things. They're just comparing this one particular program. So I think something that speaks directly to the quality of life of our residents, that allows them to go outside and enjoy nature. These are all in keeping with our priorities as a town. I do agree with Councillor Roy DiClemente that this should be a one-time pilot. If we don't see a big difference in this expenditure, and I know it's going to be hard because it's different every year, but I would like to try this for a year and see if it does make a difference to our residents and what our residents think. But I do think we need to try it because it is a consistent complaint that we hear from residents about not being able to go outside because of the amount of bugs. So I'm all for trying this as a one-time pilot, and we can have a further discussion after we see how it goes.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Crone?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll wade in on this as well. Intuitively, I think the program has a lot of merit. I certainly would support doing the enhanced as a one-off, one-time trial. For me, I'd love to see a little more metrics around our mosquito program because, I'd like, what are we getting for it? If you asked me this spring and summer, I'd take the dog out for a walk, and I'd be absolutely devoured by mosquitoes. The worst I can ever imagine that I ever experienced, in the last few years. So if you ask me, I'd say I didn't even know we had a mosquito program this year with the amount of mosquitoes that were attacking me. So I'd like to see some, just how effective is the program? Are we getting our money's worth for it? I think we always have to ask that question as opposed to just continually renewing a program. But I would support I think there is value to it, and I think we need to, and I'd be quite happy to support a one-time trial of this upgrade. Thank you.
Anyone else? I struggle in supporting this. I think that we've done a pretty good program over the years. 0.3% is a lot of money. And when we take a look at the list of new initiatives that we have out there, we need to remember that this is in competition with that. It's one or the other when we get down to, and I believe that a one-off project sets us up. I think that it's really difficult to determine that whether it's better or not, and it depends who you talk to and where they live, etc. This is, I realize that Councillor Crothers is speaking for her ward area, but we are competing with these $0.3 for initiatives right across the municipality. So I'd be inclined not at this point. I know that year after year, it depends on the timing of getting the larvicide done. And sometimes it's been very good and sometimes it has not been very good. And you hear from year to year that people say, oh, it's much better this year. And I don't know if it's the wind or when we apply it, but it is inconsistent throughout our municipality, I'm quite sure. And we have lots of areas that have wetlands as well. So I think we're doing a good job. I think we're ahead of most municipalities. If you take a look in Southern Ontario, we're not unique to having wetlands. And I don't believe we have any other neighbors that are initiating this or have had it in the past. So I appreciate the idea, but in competition with some of our other projects, I'm not sure it reaches the top of the list for me. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I don't know if I can shed any light on this or whether I just further muddy the waters. My property backs onto the river. I have a swamp to the south of me and a pond to the north of me. There are years that I think the mosquitoes are much less. There are years that they're much more. I share your thoughts with, I don't know if it has something to do with weather patterns and all the rest of it. Sometimes I think that I hear our pellets hitting the water and the next day it rains, and I think some of our pellets end up in Cooks Bay. I don't know whether that's a fair assumption or not. Even as far as how well the project works, I have to look at try to understand the information that was given to us by our presenter. It sounds like it's a great program. I'm not so sure that we know how well that program is unless we were to take it away. It's been there excuse me, for so many years now. I don't know that I can honestly tell you how well I think it's working. I've lived in the landing all my life. Um, I do hear it from some of the residents, not a lot. I know when they're bad at my place, I go in. You know, I'm not so sure how much further we can go with this program. Having said that, if we hear from the residents loud and clear, then I think we have to take a better look at it. Again, just purely muddying the waters. I'm not sure which way I go on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Crothers?
Thank you. I think something to keep in mind is that what we have been doing in the past only treats the spring thaw, doesn't treat the different types of mosquitoes that breed all summer long. This pilot project would treat those throughout the summer, which is different than what we've been doing. So while it enhances the mosquito control program, it is really a different program treating a different type of mosquitoes throughout the summer. I think it's worth a try. If it doesn't work, we don't see a big impact, then so be it. But I mean, to Councillor Foster's point, the one-time treatment really is a hit and miss. This would be more consistent throughout the summer. I think it has a better chance of success because of that. And I also would like to, if we can go ahead with this, see how it works, and then next year take a look at what other providers are out there, what other things do they do. I was very surprised when we talked to this presenter that this is just that one-time treatment, that it was only treating one type of mosquito. So that's what got me on to looking at this pilot is let's treat the other mosquitoes too, which looks like it might have a higher rate of success. And also to Councillor Foster's comments, I believe they did take it away one year, and they were extremely bad the year that it was taken away. So I believe it does work. We don't know how much. It is somewhat of a hit and miss. It's not a guarantee. I think this is a good use of taxpayers' dollars to potentially give them more enjoyment of the outside. When we look at other initiatives that we're funding, we have a 51% increase or $51,000 increase in our community initiatives. This is similar to that. So I think if you look at some of the things that we're putting on there that are very specific to certain segments of our population, I think this is something that a large number of our residents could really benefit from. And I think it's worth trying to increase their quality of life.
Councillor Roy DiClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think listening to the conversation, and I think you made a good point, Madam Mayor, when you suggested that you weren't under the impression that any of our neighbors who also have wetlands are investing at this level. And I think it might be helpful, at least from my perspective. It sounds to me like we're not going to be spending the 0.3 on the operating, and that piece of it has been set aside. I'm not 100% sure, but that's that's the sense where that we're headed, which then creates an opportunity for us to study the matter a little bit further and have a better understanding of what other municipalities doing at what point, as we've struggled to understand, whether it works, whether it doesn't work, whether it's hit or miss. At what point are we meddling with the natural world and the natural ecological balances that are at work and in play in our natural heritage areas? And so whether it's wind, whether it's snow melt, whether it's, I don't know what it is, but it's not necessarily something that we can ultimately control. It's the natural world. And yeah, there are mosquitoes, and there are mosquitoes in all parts of East Gwillimbury, and they are a nuisance in all parts of East Gwillimbury, but that's because we're prey. We're the food source, and that's why they're a nuisance. So, that's, for me, there's a natural part of the natural world there where we have to be cautious about how we're trying to influence it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm having a hard time even trying to decide whether I would support this or whether I don't, because in my area, we don't have near as many mosquitoes as they do in other areas. And I do know that they don't fly over my house, so I'm not getting anything from it anyways. But it does bother me the fact that for the 3.4% added on, 0.3% added on is, I'm sure that we can use that in other areas rather than a new, just something new that we have to try. So.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers.
Sorry, I just have to comment on the natural environment. When we are building so many houses, we are interfering with the natural environment. When we are paving over large areas and cutting down trees, we are getting rid of the natural predators. So we are already interfering in the natural environment. And with less forests, there's less animals. It upsets a whole ecological process. We have a cottage up in the Bruce Peninsula, and there's no one around. It's right inside the national park, so there's no one around for miles and miles and miles. There is no mosquitoes up there. There is no black flies because there's natural predators. There's frogs everywhere, and they eat the mosquitoes. So one of the reasons that we have a lot of mosquitoes is because of the wetland, but it's also because we're killing off all their natural predators. So I think when we talk about natural environment, we have to think about what we've already done. And this is trying to bring that back into balance to combat what we've already done. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? We have two options, I guess, at this time. We've had quite a discussion. We could either make a decision and move forward, or we could take a look at some of the other initiatives that we have that are in competition with this and try and find some middle ground. So I leave it to council or staff to suggest, are you expecting that we would deal with this and move on to something else, or will we, now that we've had this discussion, take that information that we have along with other decisions? Mr. Webster?
I think this is actually one of the last key decision points. It does represent 0.3%. Following this, I believe one of the things we are looking for, and again, this is a thematic on what's happened with our council in the last couple of years and other councils, would be to have a target tax levy delivered. And then I think what could happen is we could have this team here would work feverishly to see what we would have to do. It's just what we have to put in that envelope. And this is I think one of the final key elements of what we do with this. And I think the decision point, frankly, I think there's three options here. One would be to not do it. One would be to do it at full as is right now with the augmented program. And the third would be, since it's a pilot, to possibly do it as a one-time funded from a non-tax, but a reserve. But we've already gone over some of the reserves, and I think a reserve workshop in the new year. We're looking for some candidate workshops, would be well advised, but might be to take a look at it, and then we could ask the long-term residents, like Councillor Foster, did they notice a real impact of any significance? And again, the challenge you have is, was it related to the weather event, or was it related to the cause of the additional application? So I will say one thing. I think a component of this was suggesting that we would be a distributor. And I think that was a robust, and I don't think we should really be a distributor. So I think the 60 might be a little, I believe that if we just did the core application by the actual proponent that we retain, I think the number is 50,000. I think we had 5,000 as well for marketing and other things. And I'm wondering if marketing might be a little robust as well. I think we could probably use our social media, our town page, our tax levy flyers. And so I think maybe a number such as 50 could be achievable. And so we await that decision point. And then, Madam Mayor, if you could have council sort of have some deliberation about what would be a reasonable target. I think we could even bring back some numbers either later today or as part of our, we have council tomorrow and committee of the whole. We might be able to have a budget committee session. We were talking with the treasurer just at the end of last week.
And in the past, what we have done that seems to have worked well is collectively we come up with what will be satisfying for members of council. And rather than us go and pick which items we think are not going to be successful or move forward, then we've done the reverse and asked staff if they can find it within their budgets and let us know what recommendations that they have. And at that point, then we can make a decision whether what they think they can do without, or they can stretch it a little further or start a project in June instead of in January. Then we have that ability to have the expertise who are working with this budget and moving us forward for 2020. So I think that that's probably where we need to go. Go ahead.
You were in the middle of a sentence, Madam Mayor, but
Go ahead.
whenever you were done, I was ready to speak. So if you want to finish your thoughts.
My sense is that we are going to have a decision on the mosquito program now, and then would move forward to talking with staff regarding the numbers and where we can land with a number that works for all members of council. So I correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's it. Okay. So we have in front of us here, moved by, I'm assuming, Councillor Crothers. Is that correct? Be it resolved that the enhanced mosquito control program for $60,000 be approved in principle as a one-time pilot project. Go ahead.
So Mr. Molinari was saying we can probably bring that down to 50, or was it Mr. Webster? Sorry, bring that down to 50. I also think that what I was hearing from staff was if we set a target, they would see about bringing this in within that target. So rather than it being the extra on top, that they would look for savings elsewhere to possibly fund this. So I mean, I heard that they're looking for a number from us on where we want to see this, and they'll bring it back. And if we can do this within, if we say 3% increase, if they can do that within that, I think it might make a difference to people at this table. So I don't know if we need a supplemental to this, council direct staff to fund this from the existing budget.
That's where it would come from.
Yeah.
So whatever we have, as I had said earlier, this is competing against other things that we have heard about here. I am concerned about putting the 50 in, and I think if we're giving direction to staff, they're directed that they can use $50,000. They may find savings, but that's not what we're voting on. We're voting on $50,000. Okay. All right. So, any other comments, questions? All in favor? Opposed? That is defeated. I'm wondering, staff, if we can put this on the list of projects. I know that it won't help us this year for mid-year budget, but if we can see that somewhere along the way there are savings, that it could come back and have a decision made by council at that time on if something comes in drastically under budget, that we would be able to have another discussion with it. But our timing, correct me if I'm wrong, I think our timing is April. Am I right? And we would need how much lead time, Mr. Molinari, to let them know if in fact we were going to?
Through you, Madam Mayor, this program, the enhanced program, is more for the later months in the summer. So around April would be fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if staff can just keep that in mind, and we'll go from there. Okay. Now, where are we going from here?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think we're looking for some direction on a tax levy target.
Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had two small things and one rather large thing I wanted to bring up. One was with respect to the supplemental information from the farmers market. I was taking a look at it. Over the past 2 years, they have spent just over $10,000 on supplies, tents, tables, activities, miscellaneous supplies. And I'm wondering, since I can't imagine, just as a suggestion to those who are managing with this committee, can't imagine that we would continue to need that level of support. I'm not quibbling with the $5,500 in net budget, but just a suggestion that I've noticed $10,000 has been spent on stuff. Perhaps we don't necessarily need to continue to buy more stuff for the market. Just a thought. That was one small thing. The other thing was with respect to our capital program, there was an item under the CIES budget regarding speed boards, and I had understood those to be the pole-mounted radar that helps our residents know what their speed is and that captures data so that we can submit it to YRP for enforcement and so on. But as I understand it, the item that was on our list was actually part of that pilot project that was not sustainable, given that the region was planning their own program. But from where I sit, I've had a great deal of engagement from residents, especially in the newer areas of the community, who are concerned about speeding on their residential streets. And I wanted to sort of set a target or have that conversation to make sure that we had enough boards that our staff in CIES could respond to those complaints that are coming in. So that was the second small thing. And then the really large one relates to, and I've raised it a couple of times, and I've had the weekend to ponder it, relates to how we are funding our emergency services staffing. And our multi-year plan called for that drive for 5, the magic number of 20, and we were creating a levy that would allow for us to be able to hire 0.5%, 0.5%, 0.5%. And for me, essentially putting the fire inspector onto our regular tax levy and continuing to raise taxes for suppression, to me, it sounds like we're raising taxes twice in order to pay for resources in our emergency services. And I would prefer to have a conversation about what that, I think it's 0.59% on the tax levy would look like should we simply roll that funding source into our multi-year plan for emergency services. So whether it's a suppression firefighter or a fire inspector, we're still adding significant resources into emergency services and continuing to invest in community safety. It simply extends the amount of time that we are needing to implement that plan. So for me, when we're talking about 0.59 on the tax levy, that puts us in a much more palatable position to the point that staff have asked us to make, which is what's the target?
Thank you. Comments?
Madam Mayor, really appreciate that perspective, and we can certainly, well, maybe just a bit of background first before I get to that. Councillor Roy DeClemente is right. We had a multi-year plan to enhance support for this important community safety initiative, and it was to get to that number of 20 suppression firefighters. I think the discussion now is, if Budget Committee is supportive, this is also a critical position, this fire inspector that's being proposed. It just means that the multi-year plan under, if I understand correctly, the way Councillor Roy DeClemente is describing it, that we would simply modify that plan, change that to 21. It would include the fire inspector. And it's probably a good opportunity with the new fire chief just to take a look at that multi-year plan anyways, and just see whether our assumptions continue to be valid around future costs, funding required, and make sure that our multi-year plan is still as current as it needs to be. Because we've been at this now for a handful of years, and I think it's been a very good plan. But we could certainly go back, take a look at it, and see how we could roll that in. I think for public transparency, it is a good idea if we want to keep that pure and say this is for enhancing community safety. That's what that stream of additional tax is. And to Councillor Roddy Clemente's point, that way you don't have part of it in one place and part of it in another, which could tend to be a little more confusing for the public. So there's certainly some merit in considering that, and we can come back to you with what that would look like in fairly short order. A reassessment of the funding plan might take a little bit, just for us to go back and look at what that looks like, but that could be done into 2020 as well. And it's still a couple of years out in terms of the completion, so we've got time. I think once you have the discussion about a target tax levy, if this is something you would like us to build in, then we would simply factor this in, consider it with whatever the target tax levy is that is set for us. And if there's additional work we need to do to find more, we'll find it. If this provides some additional funding in the operating, then we'll come back to you with where we believe that should be put to make sure that we achieve the tax levy target that is set for us.
Questions, comments? Councillor Crone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I certainly would like to follow up on some things Councillor Roy DiClemente said to support. I think certainly when you talk about the farmers market, looking at their assets, I think a simple balance sheet would probably give us a good indication of the assets they have and what we need. I don't know if that's too onerous on the finance area, but just a suggestion. But more importantly, I'd like to throw my full throated support behind adding extra radar boards to our budget. General Manager Molinari and myself have talked about it at great length. I think we both recognize the importance of adding them. I think we threw a number around of about having 2 boards per ward. They're cloud-based, which gives us a lot of data and is a little more robust data that will help us make better decisions when it comes to making sure certain streets are safe. We can rotate them around quite nicely. So I think that would add a lot of value and go a long way to helping us in our objectives of community safety. So not a big item, I know, and I know the region is doing their pilot on the other radar boards, but I think we could still get a few out and help make sure that we have good data to understand which streets are problematic and the ones that are not so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to staff, I also agree on the radar boards. I think it's long overdue. And I know that the residents in certain areas certainly think it is as well. I have a question on the tents for the farmers market. Does the town purchase those tents, or do the vendors bring their own tents?
I think I could answer part of it because I was their liaison this year, and 3 windstorms destroyed 6 tents. They were at Green Lane and Yonge, and I think they ended up over on the second concession and the Mount Albert Road. It was pretty bad. So the tents, the vendors bring their own tents, but if they're small vendors or it's hot, they have a couple of their own, as well as there are tents that are put in place with picnic tables and sitting areas for people just to come and enjoy the music. I had a tent as well for their equipment. So I'm assuming that those that were purchased were ones that were given out to certain vendors or guests of the day. That the library I know is there on a regular basis as well, and just to have them protected from the sun. Mr. Karmazin, you have anything to add to that one?
Through you, Madam Mayor, nothing further.
I can tell you they're talking about changing locations, so maybe the winds won't be quite as bad as it was. But stay tuned for that one. Any other questions, comments, whatever? I had a couple that I just, we have a weekend to think about what happened last week, and so a couple that came to my mind, and when it was around our community groups and our initiatives that we are hoping that many of these new groups are going to be organizing moving forward. And I think we're never quite sure with our community initiatives. Everyone here is a part of many of these committees, but you really don't know until they get ramped up exactly if they're going to be very active or not. And we can see already that some of our community committees are very active, and others are still kind of feeling their way through. We went through and we picked a variety of numbers up, and I'm not sure if there was any really rhyme or reason why we did, just that we thought that this is what they might need. I'm asking staff, is there a possibility of somehow being a little more fluid with this as time goes on? If there's some that need more and some aren't using some, can we move it around? Because ultimately, it's all about community initiatives. I felt badly for our people that were in the audience and pitching to us. I found that a little awkward in some respects. I'm not sure what the answer is, but perhaps by next year we can come up with something a little different. Maybe it's the council liaison that talks about it and is backed up by the individuals. They're volunteers here in the community, and some of them we grilled pretty hard. And so I'm not sure how we can go about this. It's new to us. We knew that when we had 2 more counselors and a lot of ideas that were out there in the community from the previous election, that there were needs that were not being met, and volunteers in the community wanted to be a part of it. So we knew that, and we knew that we needed to put money into it. And I'm not sure if it's a science. It was kind of what they asked for and will they deliver or not. And then there were some others that were not community initiatives that we either gave to or didn't give to. And I know that there was one in particular that people have spoken to me since about saying, I thought I didn't feel good about our presentation that we got. What are the goals and objectives? So I'm just wondering if we can bundle it and as money, if that stays within that area. I'm not sure. Do we do that with anything else that takes place in our community? Mr. Valchik, could you?
Madam Mayor, just a couple of comments. Number one is that this, as a whole, I believe that this area advisory committees and community, less so community grants, because they tend to be grants, so they're what you approve, you distribute. But with the community initiatives and advisory committees, it tends to be overall underspent, meaning that you tend to end up with budget that's not been expended at the end of the year. So there absolutely is, in my mind, an opportunity to, if things come up through the year, or if you wish to kind of make modifications through the year, because even though folks have best laid plans, and I think they're some are have more traditional experience than others, as new committees are coming online. It's tough to say. It is a bit of a guesstimate because it depends how successful they are as a group, what types of things they want to undertake. Sometimes they will exceed their own expectations. Sometimes they run into things that cause them maybe not to fulfill all the things they'd like to. So there does need to be, in my mind, a little bit of flexibility built in that you can accommodate that through discussions throughout the year. So we could certainly try and help with that in terms of bringing you status reports, for example, around the mid-year mark to say, where are they with expenditures, and maybe a little bit of a check-in with committee chairs just to see what they're forecasting. And it would give council at that point an idea of, is there some flexibility Are there other things that have popped up that you might want to consider? The second thing I wanted to comment on really briefly is we as staff can also help maybe next year in terms of working a little more directly with the council liaisons. We tend to hear directly from the chairs, and they bring in their requests for funding, and we don't edit those. We don't think it's our place to start debating those or editing those with the folks that are proposing it. But perhaps we could facilitate some conversation between those that are putting those forward as chairs and the liaisons. And the liaisons could be a little, we can sort of support them a little better to either speak in support of or otherwise when it actually gets to the committee deliberations, because we do want to do whatever we can to help you through those conversations.
And these are people that are residents of our community. They're volunteering their time. We want to support them. We have an idea of the kinds of things that they want to do out in the community, but they're the ones that are going to drive it at the end of the day. And we need to be there with some tax dollars to support them in a variety of events that take place throughout the year. Councillor Persicini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Trying to mold all this around my brain here. I haven't talked to General Manager Comerson. I think these community initiatives are excellent. They're very good. We should have them. But where do we draw a line down the road? How much do we invest totally for all these community events? And what does it do for us, them and the communities? How much we get out of it? An analysis of some numbers after so many years, how much you let them keep giving money in there and spending the taxpayers' dollars if things don't work. When do you pull out the plug at some of these community events if it's not working? We are in business to stay in business to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are used up the proper way. I think it's very important to have all these. I think it's, but sometimes I look at all the money that you collectively, and I don't have it in front of me, maybe Warren could give me, what do we invest in all those community initiative approximately on what we give them. You have any idea? Approximately. I probably it's in here, but I haven't got it in front of me. How much in dollar wise?
Madam Mayor, between all the community initiatives and grants and the bursaries and everything, we have budgeted $146,000 in 2019.
Okay, thank you. So basically what I'm saying, I did say to stop doing this. I'm not saying that's not good for our community. I think we should look at all the different aspects and use like the North Union model that's self-sufficient. And if they can't self-sufficient after so many years, I think we should pull the plug. It's a waste of time, or help them to do better and to create so they can self-sufficient. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying take it off. Try to help them. When I had employees, if I couldn't teach them to be a better person after swinging, I tried, then I pull the plug. I say, this is not for you. And I take them out. So this is the same thing. We're running a business here, and we have to treat it like a business. And I'm saying these are important, but I'd like to know in the future, where are we going with this, and how much it's costing us, how much we get in return, and why are we doing it? If it's important, if it's not happening, let's help them to be successful like North Union and some of the other good people. Thank you.
I think when we set up these committees, we went in with our eyes wide open, knowing very well that this year was going to be a very exciting year for a lot of new committees. Last year was getting them settled in. Some are very high functioning, others not yet, but they're on their way. But that seed money to make sure that they have a really good start with the long-term goal, as Councillor Persicini has said, that they're self-sufficient and they draw from within the community for for their needs. So we knew it in advance, and I think we've been pretty generous. We want to make sure that they are successful. We want to make sure that every community committee that we have feels supported by the municipality. So, I think we've done that. I think that's good. Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Persicini's comments about trying to find a way to do this better going forward. We have a 35% increase on our expenditures for community initiatives. We're asking staff to keep everything within 3% thereabouts, and portion of the budget that we're directly in charge of, we're increasing 35%. These are all great initiatives. So it's that how do you balance making sure that our community groups feel supported and at the same time being responsible in the budgeting. I think that we're comfortable with that increase because we know a bunch of them won't spend their money. But when you look at it on paper, with a 35% increase, it really doesn't look like we're being responsible with our portion of the budget. Maybe going forward, we can look at a way to group the ones that don't spend their money into the contingency, so that EDAC and I think it was Trails, maybe they'll want to go to a conference or have an event, but most likely their history says that they're not going to spend that money. So I'm wondering if we can pool some of those budgets so that the money is there if they need it, but at the same time we're not showing it on our books as a predicted expenditure when we're not really predicting that they're going to spend it. We want to have that available to them. So if maybe what we need to do going forward is ask our groups to submit a budget for an itemized budget for what they want, and if they don't, we wrap it into a contingency and let them know there's money there if something comes up mid-year, but it's pooled with everyone else. I'm also wondering if we can possibly roll forward the dollars that aren't spent, so that we don't have a great increase like this, but instead we know, just pulling a number out of the air, we had $20,000 that wasn't used last year from these community initiatives, and therefore it's going into this budget. So I'm just thinking there's got to be a better way to do this portion of the budget so it doesn't look like we're overspending it. The one thing that bothers me about how this is done is that we have some groups that are going to do all the work themselves and are keeping tight control on the tax dollar and spending $1,000 per event, and then others that are hiring a number of people to work their event and spending $5,000 on an event. So I think there are different events for sure, but there has to be some consistency of how much money we're giving groups on a per event basis. And I think that inconsistency in this budget bothers me, and it has to do with the presentation, perhaps. And I think it's going to encourage other groups to come ask for more money when one group is getting more per event than another. So that's just some food for thought, maybe going forward, of how we're funding this, that maybe we should be looking at a per event type budget for these community groups, and then have them work a little bit harder to make sure that they are careful with their budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I had a question asked to me about the smart commute. And are we supporting smart commute now? Does anyone know that? Perhaps I can just park that one for the moment, because I'm seeing people and I'm just not sure. I think that we want to support it, but if we're already supporting it, then that's new information that we may want to have a discussion about. Mr. Webster.
Madam Mayor, just on that, so in the past, Smart Commute has been here. They haven't made a hard ask before. So we support it by some of our greening initiatives of carpool parking spaces allocated in our parking lot. There's a week each year that we have a contest within internally regarding not using automotive products and whatnot. this one here, just from a perspective, we have talked it out at the senior management level. We think it's a very worthwhile initiative. However, one of the things we'd like to do, I think there's been a note made about our overall strategic directions for this year. Maybe the environmental have been a bit more, and we have seen some organizations that are starting to do sort of a greening strategy for their own organization. We think we would like to refresh ours, and I think coming out of that could be some actions, which could be something like the smart commute. This would sort of be putting the action ahead of the plan, potentially. We'll leave it entirely up to the political direction, but I think what we would like to do is come out with a more concerted plan that might say, here's the issues from an East Gwillimbury perspective. We even had discussion at the N6 CAO table about maybe taking a look at it jointly. 2 of the 6 N6 municipalities have declared the climate emergency and haven't really taken the next step about having a plan for it. I think what we're going to try to do without declaring an emergency is prepare a plan that has some succinct actions, and I think this could be one of those actions. So I'll leave it to council's discretion if they think it's a priority to undertake currently, or if we could talk to this group and maybe undertake this as a future initiative or a mid-year initiative. I'm not sure if they're going to do this as a one and done, or if they're looking for municipalities and stakeholders to sign on to this program over, again, maybe a multi-year type of initiative.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the comments made earlier by Mr. Velchik about the flexibility of looking at what's been used up in the budgets mid-year. Certainly, I've been involved with organizations where we've done the very same thing, where we've allocated budget to certain areas, and then mid-year, if we've checked up with them and they haven't used it, we ask them, do you expect to use it? And if not, then we reallocate it and make sure that we get the best bang for our buck. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, and I would support it 100%. Thank you for bringing that up. Secondly, I think there is plenty of opportunity next time to do a little more spade work ahead of time with our committees. Make sure that we get all the information required. I think Councillor Carruthers at one point suggested maybe a subcommittee to help get that all bundled up and ready to go, so it's in a nice, presentable package to come to council, so that we are not overly scrutinizing the good work of volunteers and making sure that they don't feel unduly criticized by what they're trying to achieve. Because we're all in this because we appreciate community, we want to support community, and I would hate to see us take away from that. So I would throw that out there, that we certainly try and do a little more spade work ahead of time next year to make sure we've got all our ducks in a row. Thank you.
Thank you. Having said that, the one that we did not move forward was the neighborhood network, and we all kind of looked at each other and said, what was their goals and objectives? And I've gone back through it. I don't know if anybody else has as well. Did we land on it at the end?
I believe it's still in here. It was something
Okay.
that I had flagged that I thought we were removing, but it's still sitting here.
Okay, then I will just speak that the their goal and objective is an engaged, inclusive community, and I think that really fits in with our diversity and community, our growing community itself. So as long as it's still in there, then I'm a happy camper with that. I think it was one that we kind of missed. We didn't have their goals and objectives in front of us at the time. I guess we should have. We should have, not that you should have brought it to us particularly, but we were a little slow on the pickup with that one, so I'm glad that one's still. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Roy DiClemente.
With respect to that neighborhood network item, I mean, that's $8,800. I think I had flagged it simply because I had absolutely no idea what the key deliverable was on that. And I would look to our staff to ensure that we get our money's worth, quite frankly, for whatever it is, because the presentation really wasn't clear as far as what we were getting for that money. And for me, I like to have a good understanding of what I'm buying, what I'm purchasing, what the key deliverable is, and how that's going to move the needle for my community. And so I will look to staff to make sure that we get value for that money. We know that Neighborhood Network does good work and does amazing things in our community. They shepherd that spirit of volunteerism, and they carry that banner for us. And I just want to make sure that that we get value for that money, and at least it's a one-time expense. Thank you.
Thank you. With that comment, I'm wondering if staff could get back to the organization and get some more details on it. It appears it's moving forward, but we need to understand what it is we should be expecting at our end when they're complete with the study for our community. Mr. Velchuk?
Madam Mayor, we'll certainly do that. One of the other things that came up through the deliberations was some form of reporting back from these groups, just in terms of what they've done with the resources. And for me, it's sort of twofold. I don't know that they need to expend any money on an auditor or anything like that, because I think that the dollars are such that, like a very simple report back would show what was done with the money, and also it gives you an opportunity to celebrate as well a little bit of what these folks are doing in the community and the good impacts that it is having. Because otherwise, you pass the budget, there's some good things happening out there, but you may not get a chance to celebrate it in here and live stream so the rest of the community can also appreciate it. So I think there's good merit in asking for something very simple, user-friendly back in terms of a very short report or a brief presentation that would just give you an idea of how they're making a difference for you in the community. Because I think they're doing some really good things, and it's nice to hear about it.
Thank you. I recall a few months ago we had a report from the Car Club, and Councillor Foster is their liaison, and I don't know who it was, made a comment and said, well, this is what we should be getting from other committees. It had how many days they had, the days that they canceled because it rained, the kind of numbers that they had. Pretty succinct on one page, but certainly gave me an idea of exactly how successful they were throughout the year. And in another time, if they are looking to enhance that, then we at least have something to build on. I like that idea. I'm seeing nods. Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Going back to the Neighborhood Network, I know that they do amazing things, but to jump from $1,200, an increase of over 700%. I mean, I remember a few years ago when we talked about these groups, we came up with the suggested amount. I mean, that's a lot of money to jump up to almost $9,000 over what they had last year. And I would become more comfortable, and I'm not necessarily take them right out, but to lower the amount to some degree, or at least find out why they need that amount of money.
I know when we had the presentation, they were pretty specific, but we didn't hear about the deliverables. Mr. Velchuk, do you have any more information on this one?
Madam Mayor, we can certainly ask for that group to provide some additional information in terms of what specifically will be the benefit of investing that money with them. And I also just want to remind committee that this is one-time money, so it was just for 2020. So the other option that you do have is to potentially approve this contingent on receiving some additional information on what it is that they plan to do with it, because it's not affecting the tax levy discussion. So you do have some options on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Crothers?
Thank you. The $1,200, I believe, was for tree planting. That was the ongoing. Are they still requesting that, or are they changing tactics for this new initiative?
Madam Mayor, through you, my understanding is that the 1,200 is still, well, correct me if I'm wrong, the 1,200 is still a part of that? Still part of the ongoing, that's correct.
Okay. Because I thought they wanted $10,000 altogether, and so we were using the $12,000 we had given them for tree planting, which to me it's separate. Like the $1,200 for we should have two lines on here. One is Neighborhood Network tree planting. They got $1,200 last year. This year, it's Neighborhood Network. They want $10,000 for one time. So that whole thing would go into the one-time column.
Madam Mayor, on the updated sheet that you received in your supplementary package, it's page 13R for revision. You will see two columns. One's for 1,200 for the ongoing program, and you'll see another column under one time for the 8,800, which was requested as additional amount for 2020. So it is separated out.
Oh, okay. They're asking for 10,000 for a one time. So we should have $10,000 in the one time. The $1,200 was an amount for tree planting. And so if they're not requesting the tree planting money, that ongoing money for tree planting should not appear in this budget. Instead, it should be $10,000 that they want for this new initiative. The new initiative is not 8,800, it's 10,000. Right? That's what they're asking for. They're asking for 10,000. And they're not asking for tree planting money. So the ongoing tree planting money that we've given them in the past should not be continuing unless they still want that in addition to the 10,000.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we can make that adjustment in the revised sheet. So it is true that they do want the 10,000.
But they don't want tree planting money anymore.
That's correct. We
Okay,
can
thank
confirm
you.
that, but that's our understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Morton.
Just further to that, Madam Mayor, it says up there right now that this is a collaborative project between Aurora, East Gwillimbury, and Newmarket. So what is that project?
Mr. Webster.
They did provide a slide package. They were a little light on detail, but essentially it's, again, another one of this council's initiatives is the whole project and statements we've made regarding diversity and inclusion. And it's meant to be a study of the 3 municipalities for current practices that are currently going on in Newmarket, Aurora, and East Gwillimbury. And looking at some best practices, as I understand, and then moving forward into some recommended action areas that we may want to take on an individual basis as municipalities to become a more inclusive and diverse 3 communities within the mandate of the Magna funded initiative. So just to give a little bit of history, the tree planting day costs a lot more than that. I think our element of the tree planting day was the pizza. I believe that was sort of the element that we had. I haven't heard that they're canceling that this year. I think that was intended to be ongoing. And the element of whether or not it's 8,800 or 10,000, I think we can clarify that. I do know in subsequent correspondence, I believe one of the municipalities, Newmarket Aurora, approved the request upon receipt at the council chamber. So this is one where we could report back once we have a more detailed work plan and clarify the exact funding amount that's been requested. I think if it's 10,000 or 8,800, I think we'll be able to accommodate it and hopefully get some good deliverables out of this project for our community.
I have in front of me the letter that was sent to us on November the 21st. As mentioned, Neighborhood Network is signed to be a lead community partner on this initiative to gain a deeper understanding of the diversity in our communities and take a critical step in building belonging, engaging, meaningful, and deepening connections and impact. And it is the town of Aurora that has signed up already, and it is for $10,000. This is the letter that was signed by Aaron some time ago that we received. So I hope that, I'm not sure, will I just hand this letter down, or do you have it here? I'll share it with you. And then we're sure of what the ask was. I think that we are growing. We have new people arriving every single day, and if we can get information to help us make sure that they are welcome and part of our community and are involved in every special event and activity that takes place in this town, this is well worth the dollars to do that. And I know that Councillor Carruthers has worked hard already on the diversity piece, and I expect that this is going to support what your committee has been doing, and I hope engaging that committee as well as part of this project. Any other questions, comments? So, where are we going from here? Oh, Mr. Lamanna.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, just looking at our past notes from previous two budget meetings. This particular community grant from Neighborhood Network was actually pulled from Budget Committee resolution specifically for further discussion, further information. So if Budget Committee is wishing to direct staff to put it back in the budget, I think we need a motion on that. We can put it up on the screen for you.
I thought that it had been pulled. Thank you. So we need a motion to put it back in then. Approve in principle. Go ahead.
How about we include some language there as far as reporting back on specific outcomes or like that, just so that we're a little bit more comfortable with the full initiative.
And are you moving that?
Can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask if we can get more information exactly specified, what they're going to use this money for, and that's what we're doing. I don't mind approving the principle, and as long as if the staff to give us more information, that's
okay. Will you move that, Councilor Persuccini? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions, comments? I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for staff to be in touch with Neighborhood Network and get more details on the deliverables. Also, what's expected of us to support it at this point. And if we approve in principle, we still have the opportunity between now and the time we pass our budget to make another decision.
Is it a one-time?
So that's part of the reporting. And I guess if members of council have very specifics that they want, if they can speak to staff and make sure that that is part of their message to Neighborhood Network, that these are the items that we need to understand. Okay.
I don't think we want to be directing Neighborhood Network. We want to be respectfully requesting.
Yes. They've been partners of ours for a long time. Yes, Mr. Valchek, please.
Perhaps it's that I think technically you're requesting that staff communicate with Neighborhood Network and report back. I think staff will report back. If you'd like, Neighborhood Network could certainly come back and do further presentation to you, but we're happy to do that if that satisfies your requirement.
I think we've had the presentation. We listened, we heard, but I don't think we got enough information out of the presentation to understand what at the end of the day we are going to receive to make a difference in our community. So if you can, your staff, speak with them about that, I think that's what's needed to move this to the next level. Okay. Anything else on the motion? Moved by Councillor Persuccini. All those in favor? And that's carried. Okay. Councillor Carruthers.
Did we get anything from the Sharon Temple this year? Or that's the largest item on our community initiatives at 40,000. Do they request the same amount this year?
Madam Mayor, that's an operating allocation provided, and they indicated that they would not be requesting additional funds for 2020. So we've left the amount intact.
And how long have we been giving that amount?
The amount, that amount for, I believe, the last few years. And prior to that, a slightly lower amount. It was adjusted when we started to see new residents and new population, because the thinking traditionally by committee and by council has been that as the population increases, there would be some somewhat proportionate increase in that operating grant for the temple. So I would think that over the next few years, that's a conversation you may revisit again at some point. But for 2020, they've indicated that they're satisfied with status quo.
Okay, thank you. It's just it's a large number, so I just thought we should have some discussion around it. Thank you.
We started out per capita. And as we started to grow, then we started to increase that as well. It's a little higher than what we have here now, but we're well on the way to that. And if they're happy with that, then yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
As council liaison to their board, I can assure you that they're not necessarily happy with 40. They would love more. In fact, they have a significant hole in their operating budget. They had they had some funds that had a certain time period on them that were coming in as revenue. Those funds, those contributions that were growth related have come to an end, and they've been getting very creative as far as how they're addressing their operating deficit. And you've seen them do summer camps to bring in more revenue, and we've supported them in other ways. But as far as a financial contribution, this was they decided that this was sufficient for this year, knowing that we assist and support in many other ways. I will point out, last year I believe they requested an additional $50,000 for heritage consultation services. So I think we're okay at 40 this year.
Madam Mayor,
Councillor Persichini.
if I recall, I think, didn't they get a couple of big grants too? That they painted the outside of the Sharon Temple and so on and so on. So I think we also, and repeat ourselves, we were going to do according to the growth. If it could be 40,000, we give 40,000. 50,000, we give 50,000. I think we should stick to that scenario because it's one of the biggest budget, as Councilor Crowder said.
Okay, we're fine with that. Any other questions? Any other comments? It's unfortunate we normally have Jim Pearson in here giving us a history lesson as well. I must say he's very knowledgeable, and the stories never change. So he's lived it long enough that I think he instills in us, all of us, the passion for the building next door and how fortunate we are to have the Sharon Temple in our community. So thanks to Councillor Roy DeClemente for being our liaison and keeping us informed. Okay, where are we going from here then?
Madam Mayor, two things that have come up so far today, maybe just to get clarity through just sort of a nod from committee or through resolution, however you like, but that we would certainly build into the final proposal for you adjustments to the development engineering area to take pressure off the draw from reserve. And that the second thing was that if you wish for us to build, to modify the multi-year funding plan for emergency services to incorporate the inspector, that would be a second thing we just want to make sure we've got committee direction on. And then really the last point at that point is just your final direction to us in terms of what you think a final tax levy increase should look like. And then if you can give us those three things today, we could work through the rest of today. And if we all can stay focused on that, may even be able to be in a position tomorrow at the CWC meeting to bring you a final update that meets with your direction today. And then that would position us well to bring a final report back to you at the evening meeting in December of council for final consideration and approval.
Could you refresh our memory on what the dollar figure is on 1%?
1% would be roughly $220,000. And the impact to a household for 1%, 15, for 1% on a household, but 15, $16.
16. Questions? Councillor Ridley Clemente.
Not so much a question as I'm happy to give you a motion that we direct staff to effect further changes to the development and fee supported budget relating to the draws from reserves as discussed today, and further that we direct staff to present a report or a workshop regarding the long-term sustainability of our reserves. I think that will be one resolution. And then secondly, I would be happy to give a resolution as well regarding the long-term funding plan for emergency services.
Let's start with the first one then. You you haven't crafted, so could you reiterate what you have in your mind?
Can't we just roll tape? So that I will make a motion, that Madam Mayor, that we direct staff to make adjustments to the CIES development fee supported reserve drawdown as discussed today, and further that we direct staff to present a report at a future workshop regarding our long-term strategy for our overall reserves.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor? That's carried. Okay. You had another one as well?
Again, it's not drafted or anything of the sort, but that we would direct staff to review the long-term funding plan for staffing resources in the emergency services area of the municipality. The result is, and maybe staff can help here, with the result being that we would be funding the initial staff, that's additional staff request through that long-term plan. We've been hearing that we don't need to hire suppression, but we have this growth pressure that's impacting, and it's still a community safety initiative. So there's a more flowery way of putting this, but ultimately it's 0.59 on the tax levy, and if we can pull that off the tax levy, then we'll be able to be in a much more palatable place, given that we've already carved out a long-term plan for resourcing the area.
Mr. Velchuk?
Madam Mayor, so what I'm understanding from that is that we would fund the 2020 request for a fire inspector from the dedicated multi-year funding plan for emergency services, and that the multi-year funding plan be reviewed and updated and brought back to a future committee meeting for further discussion.
Okay. Understood by members of committee. See it up in front of us. Okay, that the 2020 request for fire inspector be funded through the multi-year funding plan, and that council directs staff to review the multi-year long-term funding plan for staffing resources in the emergency services and report back. Go ahead.
I'd like to see the words community safety in here. And I'm wondering whether it's in the first clause. Request for the fire inspector be funded through the multi-year plan to resource community safety, or to prioritize community safety. Thank you.
I'll read it again then. That the 2020 request for fire inspector be funded through the multi-year plan to resource and prioritize community safety. And that council directs staff to review the multi-year long-term funding plan for staffing resources in the emergency services and report back. Questions? All those in favor? And that's carried.
So, Madam Mayor, with that, from my perspective, you just have one last item, unless there's other issues that committee would like to discuss. But for us, if you could at this point discuss what you think an overall target would look like, then we would take everything that you've discussed today. We'll work that through and make any adjustments we need to, or make any final determinations we need to, and come back to you with a proposal that hits your target. My apologies, CAO's just reminded me as well. We should also just get some confirmation of the inclusion of the COLA that we've put into the proposed budget as well. Just check with Mr. Marshall. I believe that's 1.95% for staff, and then the collective agreement for emergency services.
Yes, good morning, Madam Mayor. So for emergency services for 2019 was 2%, and for 2020, 2.22%.
So, Madam Mayor, just for clarity then, in the 2020 budget, we're suggesting there's 2.2% there for emergency services staff and 1.95 for the remainder of staff. And we would just think it would be important for committee just to, again, endorse that, so that when we bring you back the final budget, that's understood that would be included.
Mr. Webster?
In the fullness of transparency, since we are being live streamed, I think it's important to put some context to that as well. So generally, we try to pay in accordance with market, and our firefighters have a 3 or 4 year collective settlement. I think it's a 4-year, and it was a little heavy loaded in this year, 2020 coming. So it was 2%, 2.2, and then I think in years 3 and 4, it drops below 2% into the 1.75 range for that. And at the end of that term, in accordance with other long-term settlements, it brought us in slightly below some of them. So it was a good a symbol that we were keeping our costs below or aligned with other services. The market review is an interesting one. We undertook a market review, I guess it would have been now 4 years ago. And at the time, it was a significant adjustment, and it required a lot of council consideration. I think we had 3 or 4 sessions here, and it required a multi-year implementation. And the implementation, I believe, ended in 2018. So we're now doing a market review. Our initial discussions with the service provider are that by undertaking that, and by keeping our cost of living adjustments aligned with what our comparators are, that we shouldn't be in for a big shudder when we get the results. We're hoping to get them in Q1. We're going to undertake that relatively aggressively. So what I would like to state, though, is that the 1.95, is that the number? Okay, so emergency services is 2.2. 1.95 would be applicable, as I understand it, to town full-time staff. It would also be implemented in our agreements for part-time settlements and that to keep those cost structured. And I believe it's also applies to elected officials. So bear that in mind as we move forward, that the 1.95 covers all salary, full-time or part-time based, unless they have a specific contract that it would be otherwise.
Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you. Is the contingency for 1.95 for all staff excluding those covered under the collective agreement, is that to effective January 1st, or is that later in year? I know in the past we've moved the impact on the operating budget into the mid-year to July 1st or somewhere around there. Where is it sitting now?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's effective January 1st.
It seems to me that it might be appropriate for us to have it a little bit later. I know that would buy us a bit of space in our operating budget. As well, it would also allow us the time to have the results of that compensation review to see if 1.95 is actually what it should be or whether it needs to be amended up or down. But I think this would give us a bit of breathing space. Happy to hear other suggestions. It's something that we've done in the past, but staff have come to us with a January 1 for a reason, and perhaps they could share that.
Mr. Webster.
From a staff perspective, I can tell you why we moved away from mid-year to the beginning of the year. And we have a survey with our employees. We say in that survey, we're listening and we're going to take action. And in the past, one of our surveys did indicate that employees were somewhat unhappy or frustrated with the fact that it was a mid-year, and that they would say the budget's approved, everybody else, all other costs have been adjusted, and waiting the 6 months was considered unfair. And this was primarily frontline workers. So that was the reason we did move back to a January 1st implementation, just to give some context to so as to why we moved away from the mid-year implementation.
Comments, questions? I'm looking at the our chart here now. Could you tell me what cost of living is right now? And how do we find that? Is there a provincial average that we have?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's a Canadian-wide average, and there's a average done by province, and right now ours is about 1.9%.
1.9. And so we are at basically 2.2. Is that correct?
Actually 2.4 right now.
Yes, sorry. Yes, the community initiative is on the bottom. So we're at 2.4 and it's 1.9. In talking to members of council, I think that they were looking to have something closer to the cost of living. I think that our community are all struggling as in households, etc. And if there's a possibility of shaving that down, what would that look like in dollars at the end of the day if we went from 2.4 to 1.9?
Madam Mayor, it'd be about $110,000.
Councillor Crothers and then Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you. I think that staff have been very good about keeping costs down. I think a lot of if we had to take another $110,000 out of the budget, a lot of that would be the service level increases that people are asking for. There is some significant increases when it comes to things like snow removal. There's a big increase in community initiatives that council's all standing behind and saying these are things that the community wants. When we look at how much that 0.5% is on a household, I think you said 1% was $14, so that 0.5 is about $7 or $1 and change per installment on their on the tax payments. I think that we want to hold the line for sure. People are struggling. We want to keep this down, but I think you want to be careful that you're not cutting too deep that people don't see the improvements that they want. One of the things people have been asking for is being able to access that trail in the wintertime, which includes possibly paving that parking lot. I'm just thinking of all the different things people have come to us and asked for. And I think if we cut too deeply, we're going to miss some of those things that they want in the community initiatives, the Tapestry of Taste and the art show and those types of things that make our community better. So I am fine with the 3.4% that's been presented here. If we can find savings to bring that down, then of course that's fantastic. But I just think that we have to be careful that we're not shaving too deeply, that we're cutting off the service enhancements that make people feel like their tax dollars are going further. We present them with the same services they've always had in the past, but there's still an increase for cost of living. Then they see their taxes are going up and they're not getting anything for it. A modest tax increase of 3.4%. And hopefully there's things in that budget that people will see that they're getting more for their tax dollars. And I think that's an important message for us to be sending to our residents.
Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you. I'm just curious, the numbers that we have on the screen here now, do they include the 0.3 for mosquito and they include the 0.59 for fire? Because frankly, I think that's what we found today. So this number is actually, based on the resolutions we've passed, this number is even lower.
Madam Mayor, yeah, the number would be 3.1 without the mosquito control. And so we're really at 3.1, and then the emergency services discussion. If committee wishes to, I think, just repeat what I said earlier, set a final target, then we'll figure out how to make that work and move that emergency services as well into the multi-year funding. And I also want to repeat just what the CAO said earlier. There's a few areas that we're continuing to look at that are kind of longer term strategic areas. The funding of our facilities, the emergency services that's been brought up today that we're going to take another look at. And also our long-term funding of tangible capital assets that we are continuing we'll report back on as part of that whole reserve discussion. But it's fair to say that we are at 3.1, and then if you were to extract the money for the emergency services, you'd go even lower. But I think what we're looking for is, with respect to committee, not so much how to make it work, but if you can tell us what the target is, we'll come back with something that achieves your target.
To that point, Madam Mayor, from where I sit, our residents obviously want to see value for their money, and I think that they're getting that. The other perception that we struggle with is that, as the town is growing, you're seeing increased revenue, you're seeing increased dollars coming into the tax coffers, and so therefore you shouldn't be raising my taxes because you're seeing assessment growth. And so to that end, I hesitate to go above 2, and quite frankly, when we've got a inflation running at just at about 2, with some service level enhancements that we have been communicating quite clearly to residents with respect to the leisure complex coming online, our new operations center, and community safety. Leveraging that, I don't want to see us go above 3 is where I'm at. I'd love to see 2 3/4. 2.75 is for me where a sweet spot is, but obviously there's an entire group of people at this table who have different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Input from others? Councillor Crone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think staff is, over the last 2.5 days, I think you've have a pretty good understanding of what we value, this council values is what's important, and what we would like to preserve. as well, we need to be mindful that, that the taxpayer is not overly burdened. So I certainly, for my number, I would like to see it below 3%. If you can do what you can to ensure that our wishes are kept alive, that would be great, and give value to the taxpayers. Thank you.
Other comments? Councillor Morton.
There's still a few things that with the groups and that I would like a little bit more information on. And at this point, I'm not prepared to go over 2%.
Anyone else? Councillor Foster.
Madam Mayor, I'm not sure that I'm ready to arrive at a number, but I think through 2.5 days of budget deliberations, we've uncovered a few places where there is some money to be saved. So I would just encourage, having, what's been said around the table, I'd encourage staff to come back and sharpen the pencil. I mean, we've talked about that a number of times. 1% we said was 200 and some odd thousand. I think that could be done in a heartbeat if you go back and look at some of the things there. So without making it too low in a bare bones budget, I think there's middle ground.
Councillor Persicini.
I think our staff has worked very hard on putting this whole budget, and a lot of hours are spent, and we appreciate the time and effort of all the staff, and with the leadership of Mark Melchek and his team, we really are proud to have they're the best. We are not as experienced as they are. So I'm sure if there is any means and ways, what I'm hearing from my colleagues, to come back and try to save here and there, and maybe we should have a wish list of all things that we want and what we don't want and what we want to cut out. Because at the end of the day, if you start cutting, we're not going to have a good service for the community. So you can't do both things one way or the other. So you give a good service, or you cut the budget down. And where do you cut it? So I leave it up to the staff. They're very bright. You put all those teams together. There's a lot of over 100 years of experience, and I'm sure they're going to come back and try to fine tune it if they can't. Because it is what it is. I was in the police service. 85 to 90% of the budget, you couldn't. That's what you do, the day-to-day operation at the end of the day. So, and this is where we're at here too, the same way. So I'll leave it to the staff.
Thank you. I think you've heard the discussion here. In the past, we have asked you to come back with some suggestions to lower the impact on our community, and then the decision can be made at this table on the removal of certain things. If that doesn't sit well with council, then that won't be a choice. So if you could come back with a number of areas that could see some decrease, then we can assess and determine whether those in fact are decisions that we want to make for the longer term. Mr. Velchuk.
So, Madam Mayor, we'll endeavor to try and see if we can use the rest of today to put something together that we might be able to bring back to you as part of CWC tomorrow. And also just want to remind committee as well that once we land, just recall that we also set within that budget an in-year savings target of an additional $190,000. So I don't want you to lose track of the fact that once you set the budget, our work's not done in terms of finding efficiency savings and ways to make sure we're economizing wherever possible for the taxpayer. That's part of why we set that additional in-year savings target. And sometimes I think we lose track of it when we get to this stage, but we still have a fairly hefty target to hit as we manage the operations throughout the year.
Thank you very much. This is for the year 2000. We're talking about October, November, almost a year from now. We have no idea the kinds of challenges that we may have. And staff have been well aware over the years how we fare out with our budget passed before the new year. And we've been pretty good at making sure that those things that come upon us at a later date, that today and last week we aren't looking at sheets, we are able to handle those. So that's really important. There are many municipalities that leave their budgets until the new year, and we know that once we pass our budget prior to the new year, that tenders that are very sensitive are much more in our favor than leaving it until February and March when suppliers realize that there either is a lot of work or not much work at all. So that was the impetus of us actually having our budget done prior to the new year. So I expect that staff will come back with a number of suggestions, and it will be up to individuals here at council to determine if those suggestions are going to work for us and deliver the number that we expect, or at least we have an option of saying this: we've done the best that we could, and we were going to have to eliminate this, and this, and therefore we couldn't go any differently. So you know how we spend, you know the budgets and how and what our goals and objectives are for 2020. So I believe we're going to leave it with you and come back. Mr. Velchuk, does it sound like tomorrow?
Madam Mayor, we will endeavor to come back tomorrow, and from my perspective, I'm hearing if we can get that all in, the base, say somewhere below 2, if at all possible, and then the additional 1 bringing us all in somewhere in the 3 or just below 3 range. That's going to be our target to try and provide you with that proposal for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Do we need a motion to that effect, Mr. Clerk?
No, you don't need a motion to that effect. I think staff has that direction. Just speaking with CEO Webster, we'll have Budget Committee as an alternative heading under CWC tomorrow to continue the budget deliberations. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I don't see that we have any other business before us at this time. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Persicini at 11:30 a.m. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much, and we'll be back tomorrow.